There is a specific kind of person that every single one of you has encountered at least once in your life. They walk into a room, and within 5 minutes, they've already decided they're the smartest person in it. They talk over you. They finish your sentences wrong. They explain things you already know. They have an opinion on everything and a doubt about nothing. And the most maddening part is that half the time, they are spectacularly, embarrassingly wrong. And yet nothing, not facts, not evidence, not an entire room of people disagreeing, can shake their absolute rock-solid confidence in their own brilliance. And today, we are going to go deep into the psychology of exactly that person, because what's happening inside their mind is so much more complex, so much darker, and so much more fascinating than you've ever been told. Because this isn't just arrogance. This isn't just ego. There are layers here, psychological layers, cognitive layers, and in some cases, genuinely dark, manipulative layers, that once you understand them, you will never look at an overconfident person the same way again. And more importantly, you will never be fooled by one again. Let's start with the most well-documented psychological phenomenon behind this behavior, and it is called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, named after psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, who published their landmark research in 1999. And what they found was so simple and so devastating that it changed the way psychologists think about human self-awareness forever. They found that people who are the least competent in a given area are also the least capable of recognizing their own incompetence, meaning the less you actually know, the more confident you feel, because you don't yet know enough to know what you don't know. Your ignorance is invisible to you. And this creates a psychological peak that researchers literally call the peak of Mount Stupid, where a person who has learned just a little bit about something feels like they have mastered it entirely. And this is the person who reads 3 articles about economics and now wants to debate Nobel laureates, or watches 2 YouTube videos about psychology and suddenly starts diagnosing everyone around them, or spends a weekend learning about nutrition and becomes insufferable at every dinner table. They are not lying. They genuinely believe they know. And that is what makes this so psychologically tragic, because the confidence is completely real. It's just completely disconnected from reality. But here is where it gets even more interesting, because right on the other side of the Dunning-Kruger curve sits a valley that psychologists call the Valley of Despair. And this is where the truly competent people live. The experts, the real masters, the ones who have spent years actually studying something, and they are plagued by self-doubt, by the terrifying awareness of how much they still don't know, by a constant quiet anxiety that maybe they're not as good as people think. And this phenomenon has its own name. It's called Imposter Syndrome, and the cruel irony of human psychology is that the people who know the most feel the least confident, while the people who know the least feel the most. Meaning the loudest voice in the room is almost never the most informed one, and the wisest person at the table is often the one who says the least. And once you internalize that truth, it will fundamentally change how you assign credibility to people around you in every single situation for the rest of your life. Now let's talk about why some people get stuck at that peak of Mount Stupid and never come down, because not everyone stays there. Most people eventually accumulate enough real experience and real failure to humble themselves and begin the long climb toward genuine competence. But some people never do, and the reason is a psychological defense mechanism called intellectual narcissism, which is different from regular narcissism in a very specific and important way. Intellectually narcissistic people have built their entire sense of self, their entire identity, their entire emotional safety structure around the belief that they are smarter than others. And this means that being wrong is not just an inconvenience for them. It is an existential threat. It is a psychological emergency, because if they are wrong, then the foundation of who they are cracks. So the brain does what all brains do when faced with an existential threat. It defends, it deflects, it attacks. And this is why arguing with these people feels like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, because the harder you push with facts and logic, the more defensive and aggressive they become. Because you are not challenging their opinion, you are threatening their identity. And the human brain will fight for identity far harder than it will fight for truth. And this is where we start crossing from normal psychology, into something darker, because not all people who act like the smartest person in the room are simply deluded. Some of them know exactly what they're doing. And this is the distinction that most people miss entirely. There is a category of highly intelligent individuals who deliberately perform intellectual superiority as a psychological dominant strategy. They use the appearance of being smarter than everyone else, not because they genuinely believe it, but because they have learned that intellectual intimidation is one of the most effective tools of social control. They drop jargon you don't understand on purpose. They reference things they know you haven't read. They ask questions that are designed not to seek information, but to expose your gaps. They correct your minor mistakes loudly and publicly, while quietly hoping you never look closely enough at theirs. And this behavior has a name in psychology. It's called epistemic bullying, and it is far more common than you think. It shows up in workplaces, in relationships, in friend groups, in families. And the reason it works is because most people, when confronted with someone who sounds very confident and very knowledgeable, default to assuming that confidence equals competence. And that assumption is one of the most dangerous cognitive errors a human being can make. There's another layer here that almost nobody talks about, and it connects the psychology of overconfidence to a deeply human emotional wound. Because if you trace back the psychology of most people who compulsively need to be seen as the smartest person in the room, you will almost always find a childhood or adolescence where their intelligence was the only thing that made them feel special or safe or loved. The kid whose parents only paid attention when they got good grades. The teenager who was bullied for everything except how smart they were. The person who discovered early that being clever was the one social currency they had that nobody could take away. And so, intelligence became not just a trait, but a survival mechanism, a shield, an identity, and that shield calcified over years into the exhausting compulsive need to be right, to be the smartest, to never be caught not knowing. Because at an unconscious level, not knowing still feels like the same danger it felt like when they were 9 years old. And understanding this doesn't mean you have to excuse the behavior, but it does mean you start to see the person inside the performance, and that changes everything about how you respond to them. Now let's talk about what you actually do when you encounter this person, because awareness without strategy is useless. The first thing you need to understand is that directly challenging an intellectually narcissistic or Dunning-Kruger afflicted person almost never works. Because as we established, you are not debating an idea with them. You are triggering a defense mechanism, and defense mechanisms don't respond to logic. What actually works, what psychology consistently shows is effective, is a technique called the Socratic method, which is simply asking questions instead of making statements. Instead of saying, "You're wrong about that," you say, "That's interesting. How did you come to that conclusion?" Instead of correcting them, you ask them to explain further, because the beautiful thing about the Socratic method is that it forces the person to examine their own reasoning. And often, in the process of trying to explain what they believe, they stumble upon their own gaps. And the realizations that come from inside are the only realizations that ever actually change a person's mind. But perhaps the most important psychological insight about people who think they're the smartest in the room is what their behavior actually reveals about their relationship with learning. Because truly intelligent people, people with what psychologists call a growth mindset, treat every conversation as a potential source of new information. They approach the world with what Carol Dweck calls intellectual humility, the genuine belief that there is always something more to learn, and that being wrong is not a failure, but a step. Whereas the person who needs to be the smartest in the room is operating from a fixed mindset, where intelligence is a fixed quantity you either have or you don't, which means every conversation becomes a competition and every person becomes either a threat or an audience. And the tragic irony is that this desperate clinging to the identity of being smart is exactly what stops them from actually becoming smarter, because you cannot learn anything new if you already believe you know everything. And you cannot grow if you spend all your energy defending where you already are. So the very people who most loudly perform intelligence are often the ones whose minds have stopped moving entirely. Frozen in place at the peak of a mountain they climbed too fast and understood too little, looking down at everyone else with certainty, while the truly wise keep quietly, climbing Keep asking questions. Keep saying, "I don't know," without shame. And keep getting smarter every single day. And that is the deepest psychological truth about intelligence that nobody wants to say out loud. Because the day you stop needing to be the smartest person in the room is the day you actually start becoming one.